Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back. Once again, it's another brand new episode of Eddie G's Comic Culture, and I am your host, the one and only Eddie G, here bringing it to you live and direct as I only can. Once again, thank you guys for tuning back in. For the first time viewers, welcome to the show. Just to give you guys a little bit of insight, I always start off my show giving my shout outs to all the friends and family that have been supportive throughout this entire endeavor. But just to give you guys a heads up, this is just a show that I like to make as a public forum for everybody to go ahead and get involved and interact with one another. Um, I try to keep it as refreshed with new episodes as much as possible, and basically I basically just discuss the love of comic book films and science fiction, as well as all things pop culture related from the past to the present, and definitely uh, try to be as insightful as I can with the episodes. So thanks again for tuning in. Um, as always, for the folks that don't know, the show is still sponsored by the great folks over at Black Apparel. Um, Make sure you check out their website, www.blackapparelblk.com. Guys, Christmas is coming up this weekend. I know you guys are probably racking up right about now, wondering what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you need. They got some pretty awesome merchandise. They keep their stuff, literally stocked as much as possible, man. And they always got some awesome, something brand new that you could definitely, you'll definitely take home loving. So make sure you hit up their website whenever you guys get the chance. Once again, that's www.blackapparelblk.com. Also sending a special shout out to our Instagram fans, Blu-ray Dan, who's been a great inspiration to this entire show. Actually, he's got an awesome account. He always keeps it refreshed with great content, especially upcoming releases as far as 4K Blu-rays are concerned. He's also got a YouTube channel, so you guys definitely need to check that out. Where he does some pretty great unboxings, and also some pretty badass reviews. It's definitely lit, man. Make sure you guys check it out whenever you have the opportunity to do so. And last but not least, a good friend of mine, Dennis Knight, out in New York City. He's a writer on the indie label, the indie publisher, Pronto Comics. He's writing the Cross comic book right about now, so make sure you guys hit up your local comic shop and ask around about that as well. So, excuse me. Today, I was actually, I was pretty psyched up because, remember, as you guys know, the last episode I was doing my the Last Jedi review. Definitely, if you guys haven't checked it out, make sure you check it out. Before you do so, make sure you guys, forewarning, it's got heavy spoilers in it. So, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I would hold off on that part. But for the most part, if you guys have seen the movie, make sure you check it out. Let me know what you think. What's your stance on how did you like the film? So as of recent, like I said, I was at the last episode. That was basically just my review on that, an in-depth what I liked and what I didn't like about it. And as of recent, I started realizing as I've been I've been browsing online, and I've been noticing a lot of these websites talking about petitions. Now there's a new petition out there regarding Star Wars, from Star Wars fans, that fans are actually asking Disney to go ahead and remove Episode 8 from from continuity, as make it a non-canon film. Um, it's a little strange, and it's a little more, a lot of, this is a lot more often than not. I'm starting to see a lot more petitions pop up online for a lot of things. A lot of them I find particularly, in my own opinion, I find them ridiculous. Some are actually kind of righteous in their own right, because they actually do have a point of where they're going, regardless of the fact of how extreme they're being. But this new petition that's been coming up, and it's been making waves, and a lot of the websites, news articles and all that, and it's just, man, because before that, I know there was another petition circulating around for Justice League, also for a Zack Snyder cut, also to be released. I'm pretty sure I discussed that in one of my earlier episodes, but I didn't really go into that. I didn't really want to go in depth into that too much. But as of recent, this is starting to be, become a lot more common now more so more, and it's at some point like, listen, I could understand certain things that people didn't like about movies. I could understand certain things that we really wish they could change and hope they could change, and go for the gusto of it. Hope for the best, basically. But at the end of the day, to be reaching such I'm gonna be honest with you guys, reaching such ridiculous extremes is like filing for filing these petitions first and foremost. As far as they date back, as far as I knew, they date back about maybe longer than that. From what I was alive for, 30 years ago was what the Star Trek: The Next Generation petition. Because I had to take it off the air because it wasn't the original crew, and it didn't follow the same format, so on and so forth. And then there was the other petition in '89 for Batman, obviously for Michael Keaton's acquiring the role. A lot of the fans were outraged at the fact that he was actually playing the lead character of a film, and so on and so forth. Like, it just goes extensive over time. Let me be the first to say to you guys, these things do not work at all. There is in no way, shape, or form in any universe do these petitions work. The studios acknowledge it. Don't get me wrong. The studios acknowledge it, but it's not in a sense where they just really they're not giving it that time of day like that. In any case, they're only taking it as publicity, because any kind of publicity is good publicity in these days. But that's exactly the case. Is what's going on right about now. So these petitions, filing for them is just really, it's really, if you think it's going to make a dent in the way things are, you're wasting your time. You really are. And getting your hopes up for something like that to happen is just really slim to none. You're really only just leading yourself to a disappointment, because, as I said before, the studios, they could really care less about the fact that the petition is signed. They just care about the fact that it's making waves so much that it's making news headlines and it's publicity for them. So, with that being said, these petitions, I think it's about time that we start realizing what's more, what cause is really more worthy to initiate such a movement for a petition filing. And honestly, man, these movies are just that. Regardless of how dear we love the sagas, the mythology behind it, these movies are exactly just that. No matter what, at the end of the day, that's just what it is. And and I know a lot of guys don't. I know a lot of us, and I'm not trying to rain on anybody's reality on this either, but to go out of your way to exhaust so much energy and to an idea like that the studio executives will mainly turn away, and it really does no justice. It's just like, for instance, what is the other thing? And what's worse about that is that this one got hacked. The Justice League petition for the Zack Snyder cut. That's not happening. Like, I really don't understand where these fans are coming from, and they're fighting again. These are these crazy cultists that go online and debate and literally like try to chew you out for disliking the Snyder era of the DC films. They really believe that there's a Zack Snyder cut lying around in the studio, and there's not. Warner Brothers had already asked him to step down from the project, and this was around the time where he was just happening to, the tragedy just happened to happen, in his own personal life with his daughter. So, to say the least, that it was just like, a lot of the stuff, whatever he had that that didn't make the cut, didn't get filmed, didn't get processed. The only thing is that they have there at best the storyboards, concept arts here. That's about it. Nothing concrete, nothing filmed. And at this point, the studio's definitely not going to waste millions of dollars having these actors come back to reshoot these scenes with the original director that they didn't want in the first place. That they basically asked to step down in the long run anyway. So it's really just like they're wishing upon a star. And then the worst part about that petition is the petition got hacked. The petition literally just got hacked. I made it came out yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it did come out yesterday. But yeah, the petition apparently got hacked. So like a good portion of those signatures aren't even real. So that sucks. And there's that. So just, I wish that, we could just like rein in our passion. So, because I could understand disliking certain aspects about these movies, but to be going to such extremes, guys, you really just, trust me, I know you don't like it, you're preaching to the choir, but at the end of the day, like, it's not gonna go anywhere. So let's just, like, hopefully, I would love for us to like rein in the passion for a bit, and realize that, there's always something more. You know there's always the future, and there's always that hope. So for that, with that being said, just, let's just take it easy. So moving right along, this episode is actually one of the episodes I was looking forward to the most. If you guys haven't seen the updates on the Twitter page and my Instagram, and as well as I made the announcement in the last episode, I was going to do a new segment on my show called "From Consoles to Big Screens." Which video games would you guys like to see the most on the silver screen? Um, Considering the long history of of being a gamer myself, playing from all the systems realistically, because I even did play Atari, the Atari 2600 at some point when I used to stay over at my cousin's house when I was a kid. But there was a lot of video games at that time that actually, a lot of them were pretty, a lot of them were pretty hit or miss because of the timeline that it was. A lot of them were products of their time in the '80s. The NE, all of the systems had them, from the Sega Master System to the NES to the Super Nintendo, to Sega Genesis. Every one of them had them. So, with that being said, a lot of these video games apparently, like, they still managed to be as much as popular as they became. I guess Hollywood decided to take notice and see if they found some source material for a box office hit. Now, it it hasn't been a great track record at all. A lot of the times, it's been pretty much fall flat on the face, fail. It's it hasn't really, well, looking at the history briefly, let's just go over it. We have films like Super Mario Brothers, the one with John Leguizamo, starring John Leguizamo and Bob Hoskins, and I believe Jeffrey Jones, who plays King Koopa. And I tried watching a little bit of the movie, and I just couldn't even make it through halfway to the halfway point because it was just so stupid. I felt like, and I love John Leguizamo, and I do love Bob Hoskins. They're both great actors to me. But this was just this movie was just easily like a cash grab, and you could tell from the start that it was just trying to make money off the name of the Mario Brothers. That was it, and so that's pretty much that movie's infamous as far as the epic fail scale is concerned, and then following that one in that area, in that exact criteria, would be another one, Street Fighter, which starred Jean Claude Van Damme as Guile, and then Ming Na Wen, who's on Agents of Shield now. She's in the film as well. I'm not too sure. I forgot what the hell her character was. I can't remember. I can't remember it for the hell of me, for the life of me right about now. And unfortunately, the late great Raul Julia. And unfortunately, it was his. I say unfortunately because it was that car bomb of a movie was his actual, was his last film. Um, and, it's not the best note to go out on, professionally, and hopefully, but he does have other good works as well. So that's also a definite plus. But it really sucked that that happened to be his last film, and it was also just very cheaply made. It was, again, the script really was just, there really wasn't any thought in making a script anyways. They just figured, and I think that was just the ongoing trend with the studios, with Hollywood studios looking at these movies. So I guess they were just like, whatever. It is what it is. And it ended up, bombing at the box office, evidently. So, after that, I'm trying to think here. Then, but it did well. After that, there was a bit of an upbeat, an uptick on that because Mortal Kombat came out afterwards, and that was actually a pretty good movie, for what it was worth. It was a popcorn movie. Unfortunately, it was PG-13. There was just no, which kind of drug it out, and so they had to like really make it something different, something great, and they did actually. Because unfortunately, you can't just have fatality. They couldn't, considering the appeal of the video games. They knew that kids were gonna watch it. So unfortunately, there was gonna be no such thing as fatalities in that movie, and no bloodshed of that nature either. So in that sense, it was kind of a disappointment, but it definitely turned out to be like a great, iconic film for it because as I said before, it was well written. They didn't cheap out on the special effects, so it was a pretty badass movie, and it earned itself a sequel. And then of course, it derails again back to what's this the Resident Evil films. Okay, the Resident Evil films. There was a big missed opportunity with a lot of them, with all of them, honestly. Um, I definitely never. I didn't take any interest in the movies when I saw in the beginning from since the beginning when I saw those trailers. When I saw that it wasn't going anywhere near the source material, um, I can't say that I just I don't want to get too much into it because I do plan on I do have an episode in mind discussing about this franchise as far as this because as far as the movie has definitely gone left, the movies have gone left completely from the source material. It still earned an unbelievable amount of sequels, and at some point, and it earned a cult following too. So I wasn't one of them. If you guys are, then then more power to you. I'm glad you guys took some enjoyment out of those films, but apparently, they just weren't for me. But as I said, that's just for another time period. I'm not getting into that too deep right about now because, like I said, I really want to use an episode just for that to discuss it because, I really want to go deep into my thoughts and my suggestions for what I would like to see in a future Resident Evil reboot, which they are planning, by the way. But the main reason was because I remember a couple of days ago I downloaded on my phone Streets of Rage, and I started playing the game, and then I remember how such a fantastic game it was back in the days when I was a kid. It just literally took me right back to when I was like what 12, 11 years old, and it was such an awesome game because of the fact that it was a fighting game. It was the answer to Super Nintendo's Final Fight, and it modeled itself after the early '90s action films, in a sense, so to speak, with a touch of certain influences from like 21 Jump Street, and the soundtrack was just amazing on those games. That was one of the best things, but I remember as I was doing some research and I was just, I got curious as I started looking at the history of the games again. And, what's so great is that I remember last year how, I read an article that Sega was looking to sell the film rights to their video games franchises, which was cool. And out of them, and as I was reading, some of the titles that they were looking to sell for it. Honest, it was pretty, you know, it was a pretty cool list, so to speak. Obviously the first one off the top was Sonic the Hedgehog. Of course, it's like their number one. That's their, their flagship character. Honestly, um, but then after that, I read the list and it came up with other games like Altered Beast, which was pretty badass. I would love to see that. I'm very interested in, of course, if it's well written, honestly. And what else? House of the Dead, which I thought was already done, but I could be mistaken. It's been a while. It was in that time period where the House on the Haunted Hill and all these other movies when the resurgence of horror movies started coming back to theaters. But anyways, that's that. And then of course Streets of Rage. So Streets of Rage, and I was like, wow, Streets of Rage would be a pretty badass game. I'd be a pretty badass movie to have actually because it was a great game. You know, I never got a chance to play Part Three. I only played Streets of Rage 1 and 2. Um, they were mind blowing. I believe the first Streets of Rage was actually released in 1991 or 92, and around that time there was a lot of heavy there was a lot of heavy action films at that time. In the early 90s, a lot of them were basically cop drama, cop action features where these actors would play police officers, and they're just, it would take, they kind of like taking the concept of Commando, of having a one man army taking on the entire mob or cartel or the gangs or drug lords or God knows whatever. And it was, prevalent in the 90s with movies like Steven Seagal's Out for Justice and Marked for Death. And then you had Jean Claude Van Damme, who was more of the deathmatch kind of guy movies, But then, of course, you had movies like New Jack City and Boys in the Hood and all this other stuff. And so there was a lot of heavy influence in that. And then, of course, around the early 90s, the music scene was also pretty much, gangster rap was very prominent on the radio. And then you had a lot of dance music coming back up, a lot of house music coming on the scene, coming up on the scene. So it was taking over the radios, and a lot of the late night DJs on the weekends, especially on the weekends, especially in New York City, that around that time would go would play like a real decent set of house music and dance tracks, and so it pretty that pretty much just like shaped somewhat the inner city life, and with games like Final Fight, if I remember correctly, Final Fight was actually an arcade before it was ported to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and none of these cities from both the one thing that Final Fight and amongst the other thing, one of the things that Final Fight and Streets of Rage have in common is they both have like made up scenarios. There's no indicated settings as to whether they're just in the city or Mega City One or some shit like that. I don't know. That's actually Judge Dredd, but yeah, Final Fight definitely does have a city by that. It's also another made up name as well, and you can see that it borrows elements from the inner cities of that timeline in the early '90s, such as New York or Los Angeles or Philadelphia, Chicago, even, and it incorporated it into the games. So Streets of Rage was Sega's answer to Super Nintendo's acquiring the Final Fight series, and what made Streets really stand out was the the story, the backdrop of it all was very you know gritty, and it was gritty in its own right, gritty in a grimy kind of way. It had great graphics. Let's just get that off the top. What else? And the story was awesome. Mr. X, the drug lord, the criminal boss, of course, who ran the city. They never, like I said, it doesn't get a name. So you know. The design, of course, was amazing. It looks fantastic. But one of the things that really, like I said, circling back to what I, originally started from, one of the things that really made this game stand out was the soundtrack. The soundtrack was just like a mix of electronic, house, dance, and synths, and it was just done to a perfection. The composer's name, he's from his Zero something, I forgot. I think he did have some I think he won some awards for that, but damn, man, he had like a fantastic taste of bringing of bringing this music to life on a system like the Sega Genesis. That's one of the things that I gotta give up to the Sega Genesis. A lot of their games have some pretty banging soundtracks. It may have paled in, it didn't. It may have been like paling in comparison to the SNES and in a lot of games with the graphics wise, but the sound system for the Genesis was always top notch. Man, their games always pretty much had some bangers. So and this was definitely this definitely Streets of Rage was was just the epitome of it all. Like it was just the shit. Like, bro, like you guys could play the game. Like literally, I was playing the game from like for hours on end, just having fun. Just doing different combos, mashing buttons. Kicking the crap out of crooks and all sorts of thugs in the streets, banging the soundtrack at the top of the to the top of the at the top of the speakers of the TV set because it was an awesome house mix. This was stuff that you could hear like on 103.5 on the weekends back in the days. Like that kind of stuff, like that kind of house rating, like that kind of house music, and it was knocking. It was really knocking. So when I read up on the series, it was sad to say that the third game they lost its taste in that. Like they lost that soundtrack. It didn't and so I decided to check it out myself, and it was okay. It wasn't bad, but it definitely like it lost that magic touch that separated that series, that made that game's identity its own. With that, with that soundtrack cut, from being, from having the original score just changed like that. So it was pretty disappointing to say the least. How that went. But they never got up to doing a part four. I read somewhere that they were planning to continue the series on one of the other further consoles, but then a Dreamcast. I think it was supposed to be plans for the Dreamcast, but then of course the Dreamcast, it didn't make it, unfortunately. So as I was thinking about it, and I'm thinking about it, and I was for some reason I was just constantly obsessed with the entire concept of a Streets of Rage movie. So I figured, I was like, because I'm always thinking to myself, like, how would they make it work? Now, Streets of Rage is always, it's a product of its time. It's gonna be a hard sell just to have, just off the bat, to make it as a movie. It's gonna be a pretty hard sale because it just that form of action film doesn't really click anymore. It's not really what's going on, and it harkens to a time where action stars like Steven Seagal and so on and so forth were just pretty much, you know untouchable. So basically, the approach would have to be pretty different. I think for the movie, it would have to, from in my opinion, I think the movie would have to be a period piece. I think the movie would still have to take place in the early 90s. I would say 1991. Um, Reasons for that being, of course, as I just earlier stated, that this movie is going to have to be different, stepping aside and not being the typical action vehicle and thinking outside the box. And with that being said, it's going to be hard to make this vision come to life for a number of reasons in present day society. All right. So, with that being said, I would say it can be very successful if they get the right writers behind the team. Just to start off, let's get a pretty decent director. Um, who's dedicated and knows the games, who knows the material, so knows exactly what he's going for. Let's get a good writing team. Let's get a very good writing team that can take influence from quite a bit. Because given the story of these characters from Axel, Blaze, and Adam, realistically speaking, when you really look at it, they were like 21 Jump Street, but with martial arts. And they all had their own personal stories as to why they were doing what they were doing, as far as going out to the streets and pretty much damn near going on vigilantism. But it represents that time period so well, and it's not gonna be easy to bring something like that to life in a modern day setting, for the simple fact of that. Um, there's a lot of material out there that they can pull from that for good influence, for good measure. And as I said before, 21 Jump Street is one of them. I'm not talking about the movies, I'm talking about the TV show, guys. If you're too young to remember, just Google it or even YouTube it as well. You'll see it there. Let's see. They could use influence from that, New Jack City, Boys in the Hood. Uh, Hell, even some of the scenes from as much as I can't stand the bastard now, but even some Seagal movies from back in the days, like Out for Justice and Marked for Death. Those are good. Pulls. You could pull stuff from that at this day and age. And then I would say the setting is gonna be a major key for this. I think they would probably best their best bet would probably go to Canada. The film would have to. They would probably have to film somewhere like in Canada, like Toronto, but they would still have to have like built up sets for the city because, the inner city for today, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, um, the cities of today are nothing like the cities of 25, 26 years ago. It's not at all. They're nothing. They're nothing alike. So how are you gonna have that same grunge, that same grimy detail, given society now? How clean it is, how mostly I'm not saying I'm not saying that they're pristine and shit, and like the sidewalks are gleaming like diamonds or whatever. But I'm just saying, like it, a lot of the grimy underworld kind of shit that you would see in these movies that represented the ghetto, that represented the rough sides of town, that represented the hoods. Um, those areas aren't really like that so much anymore, unless you go to certain areas like the South Bronx or certain areas in Brooklyn or the South Side of Chicago or Philadelphia. Anywhere, Newark, New Jersey, anywhere. Um, but to have that environment really presentable to take place, you would have to. I believe they would have to like do a mixture. Like for day shots, they would use they could just use the graffiti, the graffiti backdrops of urban Toronto, the downtown Toronto area, or and then for the rest of the night shots, they could just use certain stuff, use certain parts of the town, or they could just do it all in the studio a lot and unbuilt-in sets there. So, but I think it would be one of the best bets is to just have dedicated, and it'll probably be expensive as all hell considering that it's a built-in set mimicking a false city that doesn't really exist, and this, that, and a third. It'll probably be like Batman if anything. So I don't know what kind of and then that's no studio has a faith in the Streets of Rage movie like that. So they'll probably just they'll eventually probably just to cut corners. They'll still probably film it in Canada and Toronto, but they'll just cheap it out. I say just or they'll probably cheap it out and just use CGI and make the city look a little bit more rundown or whatever. But even then, it's just gonna be, it's not the same. So with that being said, I definitely believe that they should go like practical and build a set that mimics a grimy, grungy, uh, very dangerous inner city for anyone to live in, for that matter, and that can easily be overrun by criminals and all sorts of the lot. So with that being said, which would lead me to my next point, um, the soundtrack. The soundtrack is definitely a major, major ordeal. The soundtrack has gotta be the soundtrack has to be the heart and soul of this movie, honestly, because that's this is what the game really, what really built this game, fandom around it was the soundtrack. Not just the fact that it was an awesome kick-ass side-scrolling beat 'em up fighting game with a cool story, great story, but the soundtrack was just mind blowing. The soundtrack was just lit. It was fire. It was literally fire through, from beginning to end. So you couldn't really go wrong with that, and that's what really gave it such a following, such a strong cult following, with people like people of my generation and older who had the Sega Genesis and had these games were like, yeah, that was my shit back in the days. So for that being said, like I think they really should get the original composer and get him like one of the up and coming European or Asian house DJs, because they're pretty much on their shit too, man. They got and just try to see about doing a mix and like make a bomb ass score for the movie, very similar if not better than the video games if it's possible. But it would be great to see that, and man, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be doing if it went down that route and went in, and it's impossible, of course, but if it went down the route of taking the steps that I just suggested right about now, I would be front in line just to see that. I'd be there opening day for it, just as because it's a different take on it, and it would definitely and if it gets even better reviews, it's dope. That just opens the door for some other films to be made, because I know we got some other stuff coming up like Tomb Raider and shit, and Wreck-It Ralph 2, even though it's not a real video game at all, but also, so Nintendo did just make sure that they did license Mario to get a computer animated feature, so that's also coming up pretty soon too. But if for Streets of Rage, I think this would be the best route for them to take, and it would be pretty badass. It would be awesome. It could be an awesome series for them to build on. So with that being said, definitely, man, I would love to see that. But you know, who knows, man? We'll see what happens. If the deals even go through, hopefully, fingers crossed they do. But if the deals go through, let's see what happens. Who knows how long this will take to get off the ground? Hopefully not long, not that long, but they'll be long. It'll be some time. That'll definitely be some time. So, anyways, regarding that, I'm gonna wrap this episode up. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. Once again, if you guys if you're brand new and you like what you saw, make sure you subscribe. Leave any questions or suggestions or comments right below in the comment section. If there's anything you guys want to see me discuss in the future, let me know. What did you guys think of the show? How do you agree with my opinion? Also, let me know if there's any other games that you like. If you guys are dying to see on the big screen, let me know. Let's discuss that. Let's get the pros and cons of what these things are all about. But anyways, I'm just gonna wrap it up right about now because I am getting a little bit tired myself. But thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Have a good one.